look at this exam prep. Evening, everyone. My apologies for the slight mess that today was. Right. So, what I've tried to do, or what I've done, is I've taken each of the questions that are there and I've created your exam prep. So, this is for case one, and the slides that relate to case one, I've done the same for every question. Generally you will be asked to do four of the six questions. So select the four that you're most comfortable with, that there is the most information on, and that you can easily do. Sort these out prior to the exam. So we don't know whether we're going to get case A or case B, but sort the questions that you are going to do for each of the cases out prior to the exam, which essentially means you need to study 8 questions. Everyone okay with that? So you need to write it out. Don't just trust the slides. Do the connects with the theory, do the connects between the theory and the application. And then also just please work together as groups. You guys have now had an entire year to get together. You know who to trust and not who not to trust. So my suggestion is, if you want, help each other work out the answers and share those answers. But again, I'm not very good with that. I like creating my own answers. But if you're quite happy to work from other people's answers, I think the groups have got on pretty well based on the feedback that I've received on those peer evaluations. So the first question, I'm not going to go through. We went through this last week. I think this is quite fresh in our minds. I think the key thing about strategic leadership is that it brings together the magic of the visionary leader that will give us this ideal future, and also the management leader who will put together those specific elements, those building blocks. We talk about organizational architecture nowadays that will allow your strategic plans to unfold. So in terms of strategic leadership, there's several things that it involves, but it's all about aligning your organization with the external environment and keeping the organization aligned. Remember, we spoke about strategic fit and strategic flexibility in relation to this. I'm not going to discuss this one again because we literally discussed it last week. The second one I will discuss. So if we look at the question very quickly, please stop me if you want me to say anything else or add anything to what I'm saying. So the second one is critical leadership. Generally, critical leadership is a little bit more difficult to answer. So I often would recommend to my students that they stay away from critical leadership. But if this is your cup of tea, then absolutely stay with it. So for me, if this is the kind of thing that you enjoyed and it resonated with you, stick with this one. As you can hear, I'm drinking cappuccino again, which is a real addiction, and I need to do something about that. So in terms of critical leadership studies, so we know that the essence of critical leadership is about questioning everything. It is about holding everything up to the light. It is about looking at counter opinions, also looking at questioning those traditional theories that we've been fed and essentially force fed in some instances over the last number of years of study. And those tend to be Western American tradition theories, and the need to question those have always been there. So, what critical leadership says is question everything. Do not accept anything at face value. Hold everything up to the light. I think for me, the one thing, and I recently did a presentation to a group of alumni. And at the beginning of the presentation, I said that every person has the right to have their right to an opinion respected, but you don't have to respect the opinion. And I think that's essential in terms of this, because we've been force fed opinions from American and European theorists for too long. And they have the right to those opinions, but we have the right to question those opinions. Okay. So, in terms of critical leadership, the three elements and the weaknesses, the first one is this essentialism, the idea of this great man theory. And I think you will agree with me when we think of the traditional profile of what a leader is. It was always the so-called great man, and it's not about sexism. It is just what we've been fed over time. So part of that great man is that it's this individual that stands at the top of a pile and everyone follows him. We see in Russia, Vladimir Putin certainly living this great man theory. We see in terms of Kim Jong-un in North Korea, very much this great man theory where there's this expectation that you will respect and that you will revere and you will look up to. The second one is the romanticism around leaders. And it's somehow this belief that leaders hold a position that is significantly more important than those of followers. You'll remember during the course of this class, I've spoken about the need for more research on followership because we've tended to ignore the notion of what followership is. And those of you that haven't done your research this year and are leaving it for next year, please put in the back of your mind the notion of researching on followership. So, in terms of the romanticism, it is this privilege that leaders have over others. If you go to my province where I live and you go to the northern KwaZulu Natal, it is the Bayete Inkosi type thing, that this person is more important than we are. I think the reality is that we now have to realize that followers make you a leader, and we've neglected the notion of followership significantly over time. And then dualism, I think it's this idea of leader versus follower. And we see that those positions are static, that influence essentially extends one way, and the influence is generally from the leader to the follower. What we've seen in a knowledge economy, though, is that we rely so significantly on followers who are highly competent, who are highly skilled, who arrive with significant brain power, often more than that with what the leader has. And the key thing is good leaders now surround themselves by highly competent individuals. So the thing is, we have to think of followers as these knowledgeable agents instead of just passively receiving, park your brains at the door and don't worry until you leave later where you have to be an effective member of the community, because while you're at work, the managers will do the thinking for you. It's a dated concept. It is something that needs to be questioned. Any questions, any comments on that one? Who will leave this one out in the exam? If it is to be asked, Tariq, you're going to leave it out, okay? Who will attempt it? So I've changed the question. Who will attempt this one? I love this idea. It's for me. It's the difficult one. It's a pain in the butt, but I really think I would love to see someone do it. You have attempted it. Wonderful, Rowan. So hopefully we'll see it in the exam again. Right, and then question 3. So just to hold question 3, open the case study here. Right, the idea of charismatic leadership, and we've spoken extensively about charismatic leadership, those individuals that have those intangible abilities that naturally attract people to them. We would often talk about someone like Nelson Mandela, and those people that have been in the presence of Mandela will tell you about this force field that used to surround him, and just being in his presence had this amazing ability to motivate and energize and create this kind of excitement that you didn't get with many other leaders. Let me delete that. That's a bit of a superfluous one there. So, in terms of the 3 approaches, the behavioral, attributional, and the self concept. So, in terms of the behavioral approach, I think there are a couple of things that we remember is that often we associate certain behaviors with charismatic leaders. These are individuals that will often walk the talk and act as a role model in terms of the kind of behaviors that they would want to see from those that follow them. The second thing that these leaders do is they have a clear vision. They create this vision and they get people to buy into that vision to the point that people believe they can do more than they're capable of. And then also just this idea of motivating and interacting and guiding and creating excitement, very much the kind of presence that this individual would have. So in terms of the behaviors, you can have a look at that and the idea of a role model and what effect it has on the followers. I'm not going to go through those again. I think you can have a glance at those. The second one, attribution, is that we here try and find reasons for a person's behavior, their decisions, the kind of the terminology that they use. So in attribution, I think often followers look for certain behaviors, and when they see those behaviors, they then attribute the notion of charismatic leadership to that particular individual. And again, when we look at Mandela, there were so many of those admirable behaviors that we could admire, that we used to just allocate the notion that this is a charismatic leader. And then in terms of the attributional approach, the kind of things that we see, that idea of a vision and creating a vision for South Africa, acting in unconventional ways. Richard Branson will often, in the launch of a new brand, do the most insane stunts you could imagine. It's about personal risks. Richard Branson would abseil down buildings to show or to grab the right kind of attention. It's about confidence in terms of making their vision come to life. And it's also about persuading others that essentially they can do it without having to say, I'm the boss, you will do it. And then charismatic leaders, I think the first one from a follower self-concept perspective is that these are individuals we can identify with. These are individuals that we can share their goals and aspirations, and that we can see ourselves contributing to those goals. Is it just the attributional approach, Tariq? Have I misread that? Oh my goodness. Hold on a second. Which one are you looking at, Boya? No, Boya, that's strategic. You're looking at it completely wrong. No, 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 no. You're reading it wrong, Tariq. This is 1.3. Oh, I see. Oh my gosh, I'm an idiot. No, ignore everything I've said. Only look at the attributional approach. Thank you for that. You can see the stress is getting to me. Let me get rid of the rest. The lecturer is an idiot. Guys, remember all of these moments when you evaluate me. My apologies for that, Tariq. Thank you for that. Okay, apologies for that. I should read these things. Considering that I set the exam, that would make a big difference. Hey? Okay, just ignore the rest of the recording. Only listen to the attribution part. Ah, my goodness me. My apologies. Yeah, this one you're going to have to do a little bit of extra work. Because we would never have given you these these questions in the past, and I don't know what the thinking was behind giving you the questions, but we're very fortunate that it's happened. So you'll see that here we look at Ross definition, and I'm looking for the paper. There we go. Okay, so I'm almost giving the slide there. So you're going to have to look at a little bit of extra reading in terms of this, guys. So I think when we think of these, and you're going to have to go do a bit of extra reading and That's extra 30% without a doubt, boy. After today, you can have an extra 60%. I think we need to go read up. And in attempting this question, please define the term authority. Please spend a little bit of time on how authority influences managers, etc., and employees to behave. The second one is that we also now live in a world where followers will influence us as much, in particular in a knowledge-based society, where followers will influence us as much as leaders will influence followers. So please do a bit of extra reading on this one. You will have to elaborate on that one, okay? And then question 5. So coaching and mentoring, the difference between coaching and mentoring. Hold on a second. Right. Concept of coaching, define, contrast, and benefits of each approach. So when we look at coaching and mentoring, I think for me, the key difference is that coaching is often about more of a skills transfer, where mentorship is more around the idea of assisting a person in building their career. So the main difference is that a mentor would often step in and help out in creating the kind of networks that had got the mentor to where he is, whereas coaching is often just about trying to develop, trying to skill, etc. So the key thing is that it's about skills transfer, whereas your mentor will always be building your career. So, in terms of your mentor, you can see the difference. This idea that you will often use skills, reflect, tell. You'll also spend time on giving real answers and creating those connects in terms of networks and building this person's career, plugging this person in to the right kind of individuals who could help this individual advance. Let me just see if I have another slide on this. I did this one very rapidly. Hold on. Let me just see if I have a slide specifically for mentorship as well. Let me add that one in as well. So this is the person. It's essentially will already be in a leader role, but you can see the specific benefits. The idea of building the career, the idea of being there as counselor, as support, as the kind of individual that you turn to when you get stressed about the world. Whereas a coach is more just about skills transfer. The final question, let me just save these slides. Final question is this idea of the so-called mindful organization. Who has come across the term mindfulness before? I'm going to do this as a bit of a lecture rather than me just talking at you. Who has come across the term mindfulness? What does mindfulness mean? And I'm talking from an individual perspective. What is mindfulness? What is mindfulness? So mindfulness is the ability to, when everyone else is losing their heads, to stay in the moment. It is the ability to isolate those external events that will often cause people to panic and be able to focus on what is important at a particular point in time. So mindfulness is very much a process of dealing with stress. It is a process of being in the moment and enjoying the moment fully. It is the opposite of ruminating. Now, I don't know if anyone's come across the term ruminating, but somebody who ruminates will have a fight with someone at work, will believe they've lost the fight with that person at work, and will continue the fight in their mind, essentially giving someone free space in their mind and refighting and refocusing on how I should have done it and what I should have done it. I think sometimes people who ruminate will drive home and not know that they've got home because they're fighting a battle that is raging elsewhere. Where a mindful person will be in the moment, will focus on what is important here and now. Does anyone want to admit to ruminating? Fighting battles that at work should have been left there. In their mind, giving people the opportunity to occupy space that they shouldn't have. As a lot of people do that, and I'm impressed that no one's put their hand up, but a lot of people do that. The mindful organization is one that is able to stay in the moment when crises hit it. It is one that allows managers and leaders to isolate those essential things and focus on what is important rather than the noise that is created. So it takes the idea of the so-called mindfulness concept of being in the moment and transferred it to the entire organization. And it's about constantly re-looking at the organization. It's about reflecting. It's about making sure that when there is panic and that when there are crises, that you focus on those elements that are essential. So, in terms of the mindful organization, I think here it is about making sure that we can deal with moments of panic. And it's about building resilience. It's about reminding people of how we had stood up previously. And it's about engaging with complexities, but being able to isolate symptoms from causes and focusing on causes. Those of you that have done mindfulness training, it is a wonderful, wonderful way of dealing with stress, of managing panic and those kinds of things. And if you ever get an opportunity, the person's surname is Cabot. If you ever get an opportunity, please read some of Kabat-Zinn's stuff. It is really, really fascinating. And there are some videos online on YouTube around mindfulness. I can't remember his first name, unfortunately. Well worth looking at. Any questions or comments around the first exam? The case, I think they called it case A or case 1. Out of that, you need to do 4. I would isolate those that I have a lot of information on, where I have a lot of connects in terms of application. Remember, in terms of the balance of theory versus application, that 10 marks out of the 25 would go to theory, 15 goes to application. So go and find bits of examples. You'll see that I've shared a lot in terms of those articles that you can connect with. Right. Then look at case 2, and unfortunately, I'll have to build the slides as we go through it because I haven't finished it. So the first one is one of the things we did right at the beginning. We also did this as an assignment question, and it is leadership as person, process versus results. So it is, where is my second one? Right. So to go through this very quickly, leadership as a person is around a person in terms of characteristics and traits, the belief that leaders are born and not made, leaders essentially having certain innate qualities that sometimes we won't find in followers. The kinds of things that we look for in the ideal leader will always be that drive, that ambition, that motivation, will be the kind of the things we expect from an honest, a decent, and a person with integrity, the idea of being trustworthy in our behaviors, significant self-confidence, the person that carries themselves really well. We also expect these individuals to be pretty astute from an intelligence perspective and has a very, very clear knowledge of the business. Leadership as a process suggests that it's possible to actually train people how to be leaders. So we pick it up that in terms of behaviors, leaders will behave differently. They will give instructions, they will guide, they will influence. The key thing here is that leadership has to fall within the into the context of what the accepted norms are in an organization. So often our behaviors will be guided by what is appropriate and inappropriate in an organization. So leadership here depends on context. And I think if we think of last week where we discussed how CEOs sometimes spend too much time, I think companies evolve and leadership is appropriate depending on context, and your ability to change leadership. Your leadership style is important. So during crisis, we'll expect a specific style, but during times where everything goes well and we're performing, we would expect a different style. The last one is leadership as results, and we've spoken about how difficult it is to find the line of sight between what the leader does and the results we achieve. And the reason for this is that there's so many environmental variables that will impact the relationship. I mean, those the variables that will confuse the relationship between what the leader has done and the results that they've achieved. The second question is this one here. Right. Proactive influencing tactics. And it's contrasting what Steve Jobs and Elon Musk's approach would be to influencing. So, the proactive influencing techniques, we spent quite a bit of time on discussing this in terms of what the ideal ways would have been to influence you. We can have a look at some of these: the rational persuasion, facts, details, etc., appraising, essentially telling people what's in it for them, how it will benefit them. And then inspirational appeals. It really is just trying to say to a person, remember, this is what we stand for, this is what the organization stands for. In consultation, it's getting people involved so that they believe they're part of solutions and exchange. And I'm not a big fan of it, but the transactional approach, you provide me with these behaviors, I will provide you with these benefits. And then just the others, personal appeals. Yeah, come, we mates, let's do this. You know that I will step in when you need me. The ones I really hate, ingratiation, say reminding somebody of a favor you had done them in the past. People who live like that tend to have a balance sheet that I owe you or you owe me because of whatever consequence happened in the past. Legitimating, yeah, just telling people the policy says you will do it, or pressure. And this is more of a bully approach. And coalition, getting other people to convince a person to behave in a particular way. Right, and this is where it went south because your lecturer hasn't prepared the rest of the slides. So let's look at the next question, and my apologies for this. I did try and get it done. Right, and here we're looking at a team leader and conditions that have to be in place, putting in place conditions. So let me see here. Team leadership was, which one was it? LU there. And let me just search for conditions here. Okay, just go through it. Just make sure that this is the right one that I'm looking at. My apologies. Just give me a second. Sorry, guys, I'm just looking for the. Why am I not finding this? Guys, can I come back to you on this one? I'm not comfortable with what I've got here unless I'm looking at the wrong learning unit. Can I will put together the slides for this one. I'm not sure what I was looking for there. Let's just look at team leadership. That should be where team leadership is. Hold on a second. Let me just do this. As I'm not sure what I was looking for. I will put in the slides if you don't mind. My apologies for this one. I will definitely find the right slides and put it into the bit that you need to study. Let's look at question 4. I will get this one right when I share the slides with you. So my apologies for that one. Another plus 30% there. Uh, where is this? Okay. Okay. Transformational leadership, that's an Avolio. Okay, we had spent quite a bit of time on that. Um, hmm, hmm, hmm. Sorry, I'm getting inundated with a student that's getting frustrated with me on the other side. Where is my learning unit 2? Right, so it is specifically around that one. We've discussed it, and I think you guys have discussed this at length as well. You'll recall that when we discussed this one, we used Mandela as the basis of our discussion. Let me just make sure that I've got the right one for there. Right, so 1.4 is transformational leadership. Okay, so in terms of that, I think you'll remember we spoke specifically around the need to watch Invictus. Idealized behaviors, these are individuals that from a behavioral ethical conduct is beyond reproach. These individuals will give a vision that we could buy into, that we can get excited about. These are also individuals that force us to rethink our assumptions and find new solutions and look at the world very, very differently. The individualized consideration, these are people who show empathy, but will spend time with individuals, understand who is in their team, understand who is in their group, understand people's needs and their wants and their desires and their concerns. And then those high idealized attributes, these are individuals that essentially will behave in a way that we will admire them. I think when we think of Mandela, the idea of being locked up for 27 years and after 27 years leaving and forgiving those individuals who had locked him up. Right, let's look at the next one. Right here, ethical leadership, moral person, moral manager. Right, put that in. To just find this quickly. Right, so in terms of ethical leadership, just give me a second, we get to my slide. In terms of ethical leadership, I think generally when we ask a person what a good leader is, we automatically will assume that this person has certain ethical qualities. So, from an ethical leadership perspective, I think there are multiple ways. Let me get to questions specifically so I don't put in unnecessary slides. Ethical leadership. Hmm. So, in terms of ethical leadership, let me take that one. Yeah. So, when we think of ethical leadership, often what we consider to be ethical will depend on our philosophy around ethics. So, often when companies write codes of ethics, the first thing they have to sort out, you have to sort out your philosophy. Now, you guys would have done this with Ron because I teach Sasser, and he would have explained to you that you cannot have clear answers to the kind of conundrums we face in business unless you get your philosophy right. So there are two examples of philosophies there. The deontological approach is that essentially that it's about obligation and duty. So it's about in South Africa sticking to the constitution, sticking to laws, making sure we don't break any laws. The teleological approach or consequentialist approach is that we can only really be judged if we serve the greater good. So we are judged on the basis of our achievements rather than our actions. So if the outcomes are positive, and often those outcomes are around serving the greater good, then we are judged as being ethical. So it's not our actions so much, but rather the consequences. In terms of the idea of a moral person or a moral manager, moral person is about a person who adheres to a decent set of values, who understands their principles, who knows what are non-negotiable in terms of the standards that they set around their life. Moral manager is the ability to get people to behave and manage people in an ethical manner. I think there are many ways of making money. The problem with that is often we have to ask, is it worth it? Are we doing the right thing? Is the focus on the right elements of an organization's achievement? I mean, and this is the most insane example, but we could hire a boat and go to the southern oceans and club seals, which will make us a lot of money. But the reality is it the right thing to do? So moral managers essentially influence people to behave in an ethical manner. And I think the reality is when we see morality in leadership and in the way leaders and managers behave, we tend to see an organization that has significant citizenship-like behaviors where people will step in when somebody else is struggling, but also people will not be devious. I know that in America, they have integrity testing, and they've been doing this for 20, 30 years to identify which people potentially could behave in an unethical way. And then, just guys, from a moral person, ethical leader perspective, I think it is about the principles that we stand by. There's certain non-negotiables that individuals have. I think in my mind, I always would like to believe that one of my non-negotiables is the idea of being kind, is the idea of respecting women, is the idea of being a gentleman. So I have those kind of principles, and I'm unfortunately still a traditional gentleman. Right, and we can look at ethical leadership as well. Right, and then the next one, why do I do that? And then question 6, action learning and the components of action learning. And action learning is the last learning unit. So when we look at action learning, I think the idea that it puts forward as a way of acquiring new skills and new competencies is that it's a lot more than sitting in a class and listening to theory. So often what will happen is this expectation that we'll take this theory and we'll give life to the theory within the context of an organization. So, action learning is where we focus on essentially training somebody on what the problem solving process is, but then taking those individuals into group and exposing them to real life problems that they would face on a day to day basis of varying difficulty. So, it's about learning through experience, and it's about taking in the theory, but also reflecting on that theory, spending time making that theory your own, and then contextualizing the theory to whatever problem you provided in the organization. So the first one is that we set this problem. The second one is we bring people together who have been exposed to training on problem solving, and then we make sure that we mix different functions. So someone from marketing, someone from finance, someone from supply chain, etc., and also just various professional backgrounds. And then we look at the problem, we reflect on it, and we try and find new insights. And it's about building on other people's ideas. It's about drawing from other people's knowledge. It's about getting and understanding from a different functional perspective. And then I think you then start looking at the problem and then find an action plan. And essentially, then once you've done this, is about learning and taking in and reflecting what you've learned from that process. Generally, it's done with some sort of action learning coach. But the key here is that there cannot be any learning without any action. Right, everyone. I feel that I've rushed and I feel I've been a little bit all over the place, and my apologies for that. Any questions, any comments at this stage? Yes, and it will be an extra 30% because of today. Any questions, any comments? Please tell me that it's not as bad as I thought it was. It didn't go as badly as I thought it went. I'm seeking reassurance here. Okay, everyone. Right, any questions and any comments? I rushed through that as if I was chased by a lion. It's an absolute pleasure, everyone. I will share these slides. I will share this recording. I do not want to see you next week unless we have questions to ask. I'm sorry. I think my concern is that if I see you on the 29th and you are writing on the 3rd, that is hell of unfair towards you guys. So we are going to make this officially our last lecture. Unofficially, I will still see you next week. But just to say, guys, thank you for making